Welcome to the Let's Make Some Decisions, I'm feeling real loud, Authorization Plugin Programming Guide. Who we are, so my name is Jeremy Baker. You can check me out on Slack, GitHub, Twitter. This is Tom. Same
Hello.
for him. You can check him out on Slack, GitHub, and Twitter. So what we're going to do today, some goals. We're going to go over what authorization plugins are for those of you who don't know. We're going to discuss how they can be used in your environment, how they can be useful. We're going to go over the pieces of an authorization plugin. I refer to them as auth plugins, so hopefully that doesn't confuse anybody. And then Tom's going to do a demo. We're going to actually build an authorization plugin and implement it. Can I just see a quick show of hands? How many of you guys have heard of authorization plugins? Okay, about half the room. How about, how many of you guys have some experience with Objective-C or C programming? About the same people. Cool. We're going to go ahead and take a look at authorization plugins from two different standpoints. One of a systems administrator, one of a developer. I'm going to do the systems administrator part. Tom's going to present the developer. So I'm going to be going over again, why you should be using them, how you can use them, how to install them on the system, and then kind of what they are, what you can use them for. Tom's going to go over the actual building of one, proper coding, and again, the demo. So let's dive right in. What is an authorization plugin? It's a mechanism or series of mechanisms that runs within the authorization service. Apple's kind of unofficial definition allows you to implement policies that are not included in the standard authorization configuration. We'll go over that a little bit more, but basically Apple's already got pre-built plugins in all of your systems on OS X, whether you know it or not. This is a way that they're saying, hey, we've got some, and they do some cool things, but if there's something that you need that we haven't, use this method to build one. And then an authorization, or the authorization database defines which plugins and mechanisms run. So why should you be using one? Well, we think they're really cool, but besides that, Apple has said these are the recommended method for manipulating login tasks. So if you're using a login hook or launch daemon, something like that, login hooks are deprecated. Apple's saying, go ahead and don't use those. Use authorization plugins. They allow for GUI prompts at the login window. So we're talking about when the user is entering username and password, you can actually show a GUI prompt. This is not the policy banner, though. It is different than that in the sense that you can send data to it, get data from it, so you can have a little bit more manipulation there. It runs, unlike a login hook, it runs while the user's logging in. Sorry, not unlike a login hook. Sorry. While the user's logging in, but before they can do anything. So it's after that step of they've entered their password, Apple said, yep, you're a valid user, I'm going to let you through. But before, they're presented with the desktop and can actually start playing with the system. And then they just provide a really, really incredible amount of information. One fun one is clear text passwords. So hopefully everybody will use that for good things. And we'll talk about why you might actually use that in just a second. But just a lot of information can be gathered using these. So some examples that we've come up with, some real life scenarios that we think could be useful. I'm sure everybody has seen some of these in their environment, some pains with these. Keychain, right? If we're on a domain, maybe a user's on another computer and they change their password and they come back to their domain-bound Mac, it's on the network, and they go to log in and Keychain goes, wait a minute, that's not the right password that I have. And they get that awesome prompt that no one understands and it says, do you want to update Keychain or blow away the Keychain or just go ahead and continue? Well, we think an authorization plugin could probably alleviate that. It could serve as the middleman between the user and Apple and what they do with the keychain, whether that be maybe just making it a little bit more understandable or maybe taking over what Apple's doing and kind of forgetting about them. File Vault 2 user enablement, right? If we use File Vault 2, we have a new computer and a new user, we hand it to them, they log in, great, they go home, they restarted last night, and all of a sudden they couldn't log in because nobody authorized them. Well, they put in a ticket, help desk has to be dispatched, and it's just fun for everybody. We also think an authorization plugin could be used here at that first login, when the user's first logging in. Maybe we could put a plugin there that goes, hey, why don't you go ahead and authorize yourself into File Vault? So those are more utilitarian examples. They're more utilities, things that could just alleviate some of our work. Some different types of decision making, which is the sole point of this or the main point of this presentation, could have to do with different types of authentication. So if you're in an environment with smart cards or maybe biometric, and then Ivy will just hack right in because we all learned that. Or two-factor, which could be really cool. If you could build a plugin that also uses RSA tokens maybe and prompts the user for two-factor code So there's a lot of potential. But before you go ahead and jump right in and start building one, there are some things you probably want to know. There's a few gotchas when you're building an authorization plugin. Those primarily have to do with user context, and we'll break this down a little bit later. But you'll find that if you're building an authorization plugin, it can get really tricky to handle the user context. So when authorization mechanisms run, or mechanisms within a plugin run, they run in either a privileged state or a non-privileged state. They run either with root privileges or with an anonymous user privilege. So you might have one plugin that's trying to do one thing and you think it's simple, and then you start building it and you go, oh, but I wanted to show a GUI, so I can't have that privileged mechanism run in that user context. Oh, but I wanted to do this with root privileges and the GUI, so now I have to build multiple, and it just starts to get really hairy and tricky. So it's just something to keep in mind. It doesn't mean that you can't do it or figure it out, but you might start building one and go, wait a minute, why isn't this working? And then it's not the answer to everything. It only runs during the authentication process. So unlike a launch daemon or launch agent, you can't manually launch it or use it. It will only run when called by the authorization engine via the entry in the authorization database. Let's look at a few different mechanisms that you might already be using in your environment, and we're going to primarily compare those, or specifically compare those to authorization plugins. So most of you guys have probably heard of the launch agent, login hooks, and launch daemon. I've already kind of booed these. Authorization plugins can do a lot that these either can't or some of them can. Let's take a look. Running as root. So we've already discussed that a little bit. We see here that the only one that can't run as root is the launch agent. This has a lot of benefits, right? There's things that root can do on the system that no one else can, or that you have to be an admin to do, which is really just root. And therefore, it's kind of nice to be able to run as root. Also allows you to technically run as any user. You can kind of sudo run as any user, sudo with a P, not SU. And then something important to note, I think I've already said this, but if not, authorization plugins, when they're running a mechanism as root, with that root privilege, they cannot show a GUI. So I mentioned a few times that you can show that GUI at the login window. You can't do it if your mechanism is running as root. So we have running as a user. Authorization plugins can also run as a user. I already mentioned they can technically run as any user, or they can run as the user logging in. That has a lot of benefits. You can access that user's home folder. You can access that user's keychain, whether it be using the password we gathered early or some other method. Login hooks, I'm just going to keep discounting them, but Pete says, who cares? Run at the login window. That's primarily what we're focusing on today, is the login window. Authorization plugins do run at different times, one of them being that admin prompt that you've probably seen, where it says, I need to elevate my privileges, put in your password. Authorization plugins do run there as well, but we're going to look at the login window. So login hooks can run at the login window, but only after the home directory has been mounted for the user, meaning you're kind of limited. You have to let Apple do a few different things before your login hook will ever run. Launch daemons are a bit of hit or miss, right? They run whenever LaunchD calls them, assuming they're set to run on startup. So there's no real way to make sure they're going to run at the login window when you want them to run. Authorization plugins, however, are very granular, very customizable. You can run them after maybe a Kerberos ticket is gotten, maybe before the Kerberos ticket's gotten, before or after the home directory's been mounted, before or after the policy banner. Point being, you can really interject them wherever you want, or inject them wherever you want in terms of the login window authorization process. And then access to context and hint values. This is really specific to authorization plugins. They don't really apply to the other three, but we think they're really cool, really handy, and worth mentioning. So break that down a little bit. Context is the ability for the authorization plugin to gather information, essentially who's running the authorization plugin, what app is running, so who as in the user, what app is calling it. Maybe it's the login window, maybe it's that admin prompt. It can get that information, the PID that is being called with it. Hint values are also really cool. They're essentially a value that a mechanism can set and pass to another mechanism. So if you need to relay information between two different plugins or mechanisms, you can create a hint and pass that over. So let me break down hints just a little bit, because again, I think they're pretty cool. So let's say you work at a company where you allow your users to set up their home directory. They get to choose, and there's two different styles, style A and style B. Style A may mean that they have a different wallpaper. Style B may mean that they have a different dock setup, whatever it is. But you allow the user to choose. So we've got Joe, and he comes, he starts, and he logs in. And when he's logging in, we have our first mechanism run, and it's called Choose User Style. Choose User Style mechanism that we've created throws up a GUI, and it says, hey, Joe, what do you want, Style A or Style B? Now, let's make a note. Mechanism 1 is unprivileged because it's showing the GUI. Joe says, OK, I want Style A for my home directory. So then we have a hint value created from mechanism 1. It goes, OK, hey, Joe chose Style A. Let me create that hint value and pass it over to the authorization engine. That's also important to note because it means that any plugin, any mechanism at that point can use that hint value. It's not just my next mechanism. It's passing it to the whole engine. But for our example, we then have mechanism 2 run, and it's saying I want to look for that hint value. And I find Style A, so I'm going to go ahead and create the home directory using the hint value that mechanism 1 got. And then last but not least, the biggest reason we're all here is that authorization plugins allow you to make decisions at the login window. So it's not just throwing up a GUI prompt and saying, this is cool. You can make decisions on who to let into your system, who not to let into your system, what to do before or after they're logging into their system. We're going to primarily focus on kind of that limiting a user to either be able to log in or not. But this is the biggest thing that kind of separates these 4 different mechanisms and a really good use case for them in making decisions at the login window. Some people that are working on these in the public space, if any of you were in the Google talk, we all learned open source is the way to go. I don't know what side you're on, Alistair. Are you on the open source side? Oh, we'll have to just see. Can't give it away. So these are 2 people that are working on these in the public. If you guys know Per Olofsson, he goes by Megavalp. I don't know if that's how you say it. He's got one up on GitHub that you can check out. And then my colleague Tom Burgin, sitting next to me, also has one on GitHub that you can check out. But that's it. Nobody else is out there working on these in the public. You can't really find too much. And we think that they have a lot of potential. We think there's a lot of cool ideas that can be generated. We've thrown a few out there. But you guys are all brilliant. You all have different use cases. And you might go, hey, I bet you somebody else could use this. So we would love to see that out more in the public space. So before you get started, before I hand it over to Tom, just a few more things. This is why I asked before. To build an auth plugin, at least right now, you'll need C or Objective-C knowledge. Apple's example is written in C. Tom's going to be going over it in Objective-C, and he'll talk more about that. You need a Mac running 10.4 or later. Hopefully all of you have that. These next 3 are recommendations. They're not requirements or prerequisites to build one per se, but they're recommendations by us, recommendations by Apple, because you're playing with a really powerful tool. So SSH enabled, a backup of the authorization database, single user mode enabled are all really good ideas if you're planning on playing around with an authorization plugin, because this is the beautiful warning that Apple gives us when you're looking into their documentation. Like I said, you're playing with a very powerful tool. So you risk breaking the login window and the login mechanism to your machine when you're doing this if you do it wrong. And what will happen is if you, I don't know, let's just say you call your plugin the wrong name, Apple will try to call it, it'll break. And then it'll just refresh the login window. It'll try to call it, it'll break. And you're basically just locked out. These SSH, not these, but SSH uses a different authorization engine to get into the system. So you're able to kind of circumvent that GUI prompt and go and remove your entry or your plugin, whatever, if you do end up making a mistake, or obviously single user mode. Apple actually recommends you use a whole different system just to make sure you don't lock yourself out. All right, so keep in mind, I'm like doing the sysadmin side of this. So we're going to go over more of the sysadmin installation of the plugin, what you would get if you weren't the developer building this, what they need to give you, and what you need to do to get it to run. The 2 required components are the .bundle on the file system. Again, if you're not the developer, they'll give you the .bundle. And the entry in the authorization database. The .bundle on the file system, this is where you put it. It's under /library/security, security agent plugins. Apple has some old documentation that says to put it under /system, library, core services, security agent plugins. Don't do that. Hopefully everybody knows not to touch /system. Plus, when 10.11 comes out, you shouldn't be able to touch /system. So this is where you want them to live, in the library security agent plugins, and you'll see I've got my .bundle extension. So this is just a command that allows you to read your authorization database, and specifically the key for the login window. Like I said, that's what we're focusing on. So if you were to run this on your system right now, security authorization db read system.login.console, it will print out in XML format all of the different plugins and mechanisms that you have on your system. If you've never dealt with them, you'll just see apples. But you should get something that looks a lot like that. So I mentioned this a few times. Apple's got all these different plugins built in. You see built in. Login windows, there's all these different ones. These are all of the different plugins and mechanisms that run every time you log into your system. Let's break that down a little bit because, again, this is important to get right. So the first piece is your plugin name. This is pretty crucial because if you misspell this, or if you get a capitalization wrong, if it's supposed to be a lowercase v and I put an uppercase V, you break your login window, like I was talking about earlier. So we can see here the example I've got, verify auth plugin. Let me go back here for a second. You can see my .bundle is verify auth plugin, capital V, A, and P. So it's important to get that piece right. So then after that is, zoom out, cool, our mechanism. So this is our actual mechanisms that's running within the plugin. This is not as crucial to get right. You still want to spell it right. You still want to get the capitalization right, but it won't break the login window. If you don't, what happens at this point is Apple's already called the plugin. That's what breaks it if it can't find the plugin. Apple's already called the plugin. At this point, the plugin is handling calling the mechanism. If it can't find the mechanism, it just exits and Apple goes through like nothing ever happened. Your plugin will never get run, or mechanism will never get run, but you can still log into your system. So it's a little less dangerous. And then lastly is, I've mentioned this over and over again, privileged versus non-privileged. So privileged being your mechanism runs with root privileges, non-privileged being that it runs with an anonymous user privilege. You don't see privileged on all of these because it's not required. It's only required if it is, in fact, a privileged mechanism. So if it's a non-privileged, you don't need to write anything. You'll see Apple's built-in policy banner is not privileged. Anybody know why? Because it shows a GUI. Exactly. You can't show a GUI if it's privileged. And then lastly is the syntax. These are also two very important components to your entry in the authorization database. The colon separates the plugin from the mechanism. You'll see that in every single entry. There's a plugin, colon, mechanism. And then the comma is what separates it from the privileged. So again, if you're not a privileged mechanism, there is no comma. You can see at the top, we don't have a comma. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Tom to go over the actual building.
Thanks, Jeremy. Let's have a hand for Jeremy real quick.
All right. All right. I'm going to change my screen here so you can see what I'm doing when we get into Xcode. It is on. Guys in the back, can you hear me? You can turn it up a little bit. Check, 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 check. That better? Sweet. All right, we're going to mirror the display. All right, that looks better. So, authorization plugins. We think there's a lot of potential here. If you have any type of requirement that's not already built into the login window or you can get from other vendors, it's a really cool space where we can kind of manipulate and really do anything security to really anything that we want utility-wise at that space. So it's pretty cool. If you're interested, talk more about it outside this and we can really get into it. So the end goal for today is we're going to end up with a authorization plugin that will essentially stop a login and display GUI if the username has the word admin in it. So it's a real simple example of just what the login windows are, the authorization plugins are capable to do at the login window. So it's nothing really complex. You can get way more deep into this, but for this talk, we're just going to do something really simple. So first off, you guys want to go to this site and... Sorry.
Is that me? Just to note, this is a .git repository, so you can git clone that, or you can just take off the .git to get to it from the web and download the zip.
Yeah. And Jeremy is going to push it out on Slack or Twitter, so if you're on that, you can grab it as well. So while you're downloading this, the format of the talk, the second half is I'm going to go through a bunch of slides, which basically shows what we're going to do, and then we're actually going to do it in Xcode. And hopefully at the end, we'll end up with a finished product that we can give it back to Jeremy and have him test. Everyone got the download link? Good to go? All right, so we're going to be using Xcode. So we want to go ahead and open that up. We're going to be using the Objective-C today. Like Jeremy mentioned, the original Apple auth plugin example is written in C. It's really ugly. It has a bunch of functions that you don't need and aren't required to interact with the authorization service. So I went ahead and took that and rewrapped it in Objective-C, kind of made it a little easier to understand so we can break it down into a little easier chunks. So OS X in Xcode has a built-in .bundle template already for us. So we're going to go to Framework and Library and choose Bundle. And we're going to call it Verify Auth Plugin. You can call it really whatever you want, but for this example, we're going to call it Verify Auth Plugin. It's important because at this point, this is the name of the bundle and the binary that's in the bundle. So that's the name that you're going to be using later for your authorization database entry. So you want it to be something that you remember and that you're okay with using later. So I'm going to break this down into two parts. We're going to have one Objective-C class that's going to hold everything we need to have the core requirements of programming with authorization plugins. That's going to have 6 methods and the data types that we need to interact with authorization services. And then after that, after we get that all sorted, we're going to bring in a mechanism class. And that's actually going to act and do something for us. So first off, we're going to make a new file. And we're going to choose Total class. And it's just going to be a root NSObject class, and we're going to call it authorization plugin. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and do what we just went over. So I'm going to open up Xcode. I'm going to create a new project here. Framework and Library and Bundle. And I'm going to call it Verify Auth Plugin. Spelling look okay?
Looks good.
All right. And we just want to make sure it has the bundle extension down here. I'm going to place it on my desktop and like Git. So at this point we have a template. There's no really source code in here at all. So we're going to go ahead and add the Coco class that we need to call. Still creating my local Git repository. What are you doing? Let's see if we can quit this and just choose not to use Git, because it is hunt up. The demo gods strike again. I've never seen that before. Same thing.
And here, Tom, he's pretty quiet, so I just want to make sure. Okay.
Verify Auth Plugin. No Git for us today. Okay, sweet. Looks like it's ready. So we're going to say new file, Coco class. Let's see what's going on.
I didn't mention this at the beginning, but we're happy to answer any questions throughout. So does anybody have any while we're waiting on this to finish, or did it finish? Nope, still indexing. So far, does anybody have any questions? Sweet.
I have a specific question about the funnel to adding users plugin.
Okay.
Or like what mechanism under the covers is.
So there's a hidden, Tom can't speak loud enough and I can't speak quiet enough. There's a hidden, is that a method within the library? There's an OD FDE DY lib,
Yeah, it's a hidden symbol.
and there's a hidden symbol in there that we think we've cracked down to what Apple uses to authorize a user when they're an admin. So if you remember 10.8 and before, the Google guys came up with that awesome FDE setup from 10.8 that allowed a user who was just an admin, there he is, to authorize another user, right? So unlike what we have now, where Rich says you have to have that person on the inside, you didn't need that. You just needed an admin. And now, what we think they're still using it for, rather than just removing it, is when you're in the system preference pane for File Vault and it says, hey, you need to enable a user, and you go to unlock that. Then when you hit enable users, it doesn't ask you for a password again. It already just has that green checkbox, and it's using that method, symbol, whatever, to pass the credential through. And so you're actually able to do that with Objective-C in your own little class.
All the way up to 10.11, it's still there. Still using.
So that one's already on GitHub actually. So if you wanted to check it out, Tom's already posted that up, and you can kind of play around with it.
Yeah.
We don't recommend. You be careful when you're using it, because it's very undocumented and very much thrown together for fun. So it's a cool idea, but clearly could change at any moment.
Yeah.
Do it.
Definitely want to do some symbol checking on that for deploying it. Okay, so it looks like it's kind of okay right now. So I'm going to create that new class called Authorization Plugin. This is really big. I'm going to take this down just a little bit. You guys can still see that? I'll zoom in on the important parts. So, we've done that. In between every step, I'm going to save and build just to make sure that everything goes okay. And we can't build here. There's something majorly wrong with my Xcode. So,
Should never do a last minute run through. Dang it.
I'm going to give my system a reboot. Sorry. We're doing it.
All right. Any other questions? Anything else we can talk about? Yeah.
So you talked about that class right now, and you also mentioned, you also spoke about keychain.
Mm-hmm.
And one problem we have is just the maddening keychain prompts with, that keep coming up.
Yeah.
You just log in, and is there a way to sort of basically, as the user logs in a golden triangle, is there a way to pass that information into the keychain if the user has the same, if they haven't changed the keychain password, right?
So if they haven't changed, so he's asking about keychain for those who didn't hear, and the consistent awesome prompts that we get. But you're saying if they haven't changed their password?
Well, I mean, what happens is that, even with, we just did a massive rollout to 10.10.
Yep.
And everybody still had the same password. So the keychain prompts.
Lovely local items all of a sudden. Yeah.
All the different demons that are running that call the keychain.
So no and yes is the answer. We haven't found any good way to do this yet. Apple still works some crazy magic, and clearly they haven't even figured out the local items yet, because you still have to reboot, right?
Yeah.
We know as far as that. So we can delete that pretty easily, just like you would with a terminal, force it to reboot, and then great, you're done. But besides that, there's no real way. I mean, we could do that before you ever get prompted, right? We could just remove the local items and force the user to reboot, but that's not the best user experience. The best we've kind of come up with, and would love to hear feedback for Keychain, is really letting Apple handle that right now until we can maybe figure something else out, but maybe try to alleviate the terminology. I think personally, at least, that prompt that you see is pretty horrible, and no one knows what a keychain is unless they've dealt with the Mac. And so when they're, a customer or a user gets that prompt, they're like, what the heck is a keychain? My keys are on my pocket, right? So if anything, I think the best thing you could do is write a plugin that prompts them, because you can do a password check, right? You can try to unlock the keychain with the password they provide, and if it says this isn't going to work, then you could throw up a GUI that says, hey, you're going to see this prompt in a minute, go ahead and click this or that, and just give a little bit more instruction without needing them to call a help desk and have the person walk them through it. So it's more of a bridging the gap between what Apple has already done and what you're having to do as the help desk or a ticket, whatever. But right now, there's no real good way to just bypass that. Yeah.
So maybe next PSU you can do a session on Open Directory plugins, because on an Open Directory plugin you can silently capture their credentials and update the keychain.
But you'd still need the old credential, right?
you're getting as part of the plugin, you get your credentials.
You're gathering the credentials.
Their credentials.
Sure, but aren't you, I'm asking, I'm not arguing, you're getting the current credential that can't unlock the keychain though. So you'd still have to have it prompt again, right, for that old password, which is what Apple's doing with the update password, right?
Yeah, you're
Because if I've changed my,
prior to that, right?
yeah. So, I mean, yeah, so, right, there's obviously good ideas, and this is obviously a common issue that we've all run into, and we just thought plugins could probably alleviate that in some way, whether it's bypassing Apple completely or, again, just providing those instructions. So I would love to, I would love to not have to have those tickets anymore. So if anybody else has good ideas about it, let us know. Anybody else have tickets? Oh, sorry. Don't send them my way. Anybody else have questions? Yeah. We're all here, therefore our ticket queues are just going up. Yeah.
When playing with Fireball, did you find a way to lock back the volume? Relock. Relock the volume, yes.
So he asked if we found a way to relock the volume with the FileVault authorization plugin, and that's a question for Tom.
I'm still stuck on that. When I have the monitor plugged in, everything freaks out. It won't let me build. It won't let me add files.
I bet you it has to do with
When
the
it
splitter maybe
is
that they
not
put in?
plugged in, everything was working just fine.
Change the resolution.
I changed it to the.
Forces the EBID table to only accept 1024 by 768.
So to answer your question, Johan, I'm not sure. I don't know that Tom built most of that or all of that, so I don't really know what he did with it.
So you want me to switch it back to 1024?
Yeah.
10.10 also had a bug fix that had to do with certain external monitors.
I'm on 10.10.4, but and
Probably
then
a 10.11 issue.
and see it just gets stuck on that. It's just trying
Graphics
to build
drivers.
and compile. I'm 10.10.4.
Oh no!
So let's see, how can we do this? Could we hook it just into this TV and everyone can get closer?
Is there a way to undo that switch that they put in? Could that have anything to do with it? They added that splitter right before.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Did you see where they
I'm actually confused though, Johan. Maybe you can expand on that for me. Why would you want to relock the disk? So after I've authorized a user, why am I relocking the disk?
Yeah.
I've made an authorization plugin to play with two firewall volumes.
Okay.
One is to have system volume and user volume.
Yep.
And I want to unlock the user volume before the user
I see.
So it's work with the authorization plugin.
Right.
We are able to do that. But the main problem is when you remount the second volume, the key stays here. So anyone can just remount it without any authorization needs.
Gotcha.
So I try to roll up.
Yeah.
Again, at this time, I don't find a way to do it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know. So if anybody didn't hear him or just to have it on the microphone, he was talking about when he has two volumes, a system volume and a user volume, he's not able to relock, I guess, the system volume, right? The user volume. Okay, sorry.
Let's try to take that thing off.
That kind of leads to another question, the bigger question, which is, does this run or have any bearing? I've seen it log in, but is there anything that runs it log out?
Did you say there is?
Or like a login, log out hook.
Yeah, I mean, there's logout hooks. Authorization plugins, I don't know. Again, I have to assume because something's unmounting your home directory, stuff like that. So you're saying no? Oh, I thought you were shaking your head. I'm sorry.
Question, can you use this to
Right.
ask you when you use it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
It was this little guy.
EBID
Weird.
table.
But that looks beautiful.
720?
Hey, you stole the monitor from my Apple UGS.
Yeah.
Those hidden values, how long do they keep for? Are they temporary?
So it's a good question. Yeah. So context and hint values. You can write to both context and hint values. Context is also provided via the authorization engine. That's filling in information for you, but you can technically write to it. context values they're just floating around. Even after the login process is done, the next time you log in, that value is still set. So you want to be careful. Hint values are destroyed every time. So if you create a hint value, and let's say you do pass in a clear text password for some reason to be sent to another mechanism, after that authentication process is finished, after all the different plugins have run and you're in the system, that hint value is destroyed. So it's a good question. Are we back up? Lovely and dark, but
back up.
that's okay. Sweet.
All right.
Thanks, guys, for bearing with us. Sorry.
required to set up the references to the other methods that we're going to be defining in this class so it can hand them back to the authorization engine. We have mechanism create, which will fill in the data for the mechanism record that we set up. And then mechanism invoke, and this is where all the work is done. It's responsible for actually making the decision. So this is the point where it'll actually call the code that you want to run in your mechanism, and then tell the login window, hey, I want to stop the login, I want to allow the login, the user hit the cancel button, or it was an unknown error, and you can handle those however you see fit. But we're going to be dealing with authorization allow and authorization deny in this project. And then we have to define our 3 teardown methods. We're not going to get too much into them. They just free up the data that we created earlier on with our create methods. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we see here that we added our plugin create method, our mechanism create method, and our mechanism invoke method. And then we also have our 3 teardowns, deactivate, destroy, and destroy. So I'm going to go ahead and save these and build it now, make sure with no errors. Great, no errors. So at this point, we've fulfilled the requirements. We have our 6 required methods and our 2 data types, and we've defined them in our header file. So our header file is essentially done here. Great, header file is done. So let's go ahead and implement it. So now we have to do what we said we were going to do. So we got to implement the 6 methods. Let's go ahead and do that now. So we can see Xcode is smart enough to tell us, hey, you told me you were going to give us 8 method definitions and you haven't done any. Our 6 required and our 2 verify of the data that we, our data structures that we set up. So let's start with the 2 verification data structures, verify data, our mechanism valid and our plugin valid. This is essentially just checking to make sure that nothing is null and that the definitions that Apple is expecting are there. So let's save and build. Build succeeded, sweet. We still see that our other 6 aren't defined yet. So we're going to start with authorization plugin create. And this is the method that will actually create our plugin and it should be exposed as an external C function to the authorization service so it can call it. You see here it's just creating some space for the plugin and filling in the data, and this is the important part. This is the required piece of the main piece that this thing does, is it passes back a structure that contains references to the other 5 required methods for interacting with the authorization plugin, and it passes them up to the authorization engine, and then the authorization engine can call those when it needs to. So we're going to leave it commented out for now until we finish defining the rest of our methods, implementing the rest of our methods. So the next guy we got to do is mechanism create. Pretty simple. It just fills in the data that we need for interacting with the authorization engine, and it also fills in the data for our 2 custom types. So all this does is this mechanism ID right here is coming directly from the authorization database. So what Jeremy was showing you earlier, how it has the plugin name, colon, and then stop admin login in the system console library, system console login authorization database. It's just a string. So Jeremy typed in stop admin login. What I'm doing here is checking to make sure it says stop admin login. And if it does, it'll go ahead and set this value in our mechanism record to true. And then later on in the mechanism invoke method, we can key off of that and then perform a certain function depending on what it is. So if it's stop admin, we're going to make decisions. If it's log happenings, then we might send some logs somewhere. Save and build. No problems. And now the last important method is mechanism invoke. And this is where the actual work is done. So this is called by the authorization engine, and it's expecting at some point during this execution a response back saying we're going to allow the user to log in or we're going to stop the user from logging in. And that's what we're doing here at the bottom. So basically, to fulfill the requirement, we're just going to say k authorization result allow, which is we're going to enter into this callback method. The Not going to get too much into it, but Apple gives us these callback methods to make these decisions. So it's something that's defined in the API that we can use. And setting it to allow will basically make this plugin do nothing right now. It's just going to go through, run the mechanism, and say, OK, we're going to let him in. Later on, we're going to fill in stop admin login. I don't think we'll get to log happenings, but we're going to fill in stop admin login, and we'll actually have it make a decision. The cool thing about this mechanism record is we can pass the reference to any other class to make that decision for us, because it's just a callback that it has to call. So it can happen at any point in this execution of mechanism invoke. So as long as it happens within here and we give the authorization engine an answer, it'll be happy. Save and build. Build succeeded. And our last three are our cleanup methods, so I'm not going to really do too much with them, but they just kind of free up the memory that we allocated earlier on. So save and build. Awesome. So at this point, we have a fully implemented Objective-C class. It doesn't really do much anything yet, but it does meet all the requirements of the authorization plugin API. So great, fully implemented class. But how does the authorization engine call it? We still haven't set up that external facing C function that we were talking about. Authorization engines don't call Objective-C classes. We kind of have to bridge that gap with a wrapper. So what we're going to do is, here's our authorization engine, just an example. It's looking to call this authorization plugin create. It's defined somewhere else, not inside of it. What we have to do is define that within our plugin, and then have our plugin send back the references to the other 5 required methods. The references, again, are handed to the engine, and then the engine, in turn, goes ahead and calls them in order that, that it needs to. So it first creates the mechanism, and then it invokes it, looks for an answer, makes a decision, either stops the login or allows. And then eventually, if we don't have any other mechanisms, it'll destroy and deactivate and eventually destroy the plugin. So we're going to build those wrappers really quick. This is what allows us to have nice, pretty Objective-C methods with documentation. We just need our main entry point to be a C function. So we're going to build that in Xcode right here outside of our Objective-C class. We're going to do it up top here outside of the implementation. And we're going to set up this wrapper. And what it does is it basically allows this method to be seen by the authorization engine. And in turn, it fulfills what it's supposed to, and it returns back that plugin interface that has the references to all the other required mechanisms, methods. So since we've done that, we can safely, don't want to put a 1 there. There we go. We can safely come down here and comment out, uncomment the out plugin interface pointer, and it will then assign that gplugin interface structure that we set up here with the references to all the methods, and it'll set that up safely. So now if we save and build, we got a fully implemented plugin. We could drop this on a system, put an entry in a database, it'll be called, and our login window won't blow up, which is nice. But it really doesn't do anything at this point. So what we have to do is, for sake of time, I'm just going to pull in a couple pieces, pre-canned pieces that's going to make the decision for us. Can't talk and click at the same time. Okay, I'm going to pull in some classes that we'll use. And I'm going to pull in a view because we wanted to display something if the login is not allowed. So we're going to go into this class, and I have right here the stop admin login.h&m. This is a class, Objective-C class, representing the mechanism that's going to be run by the authorization plugin. You can write all this code directly inside the authorization plugin, but I want to make it a little more modular and kind of break apart that idea of a plugin and a mechanism as separate things, because they really are. So it's just a simple class. All it has is one public method, and it takes as input a mechanism record. So let's dig into what it actually does. First thing it does is basically goes to the user context values, which Jeremy was talking about earlier, which are unique to authorization plugins. It can go and see who's logging in, whether they, what their password was, things like that. But all we're going to get at is just their username. So it takes in their short name, and all we're really doing here, it's super simple, is comparing the username. Not really comparing, just searching the username to see if it has the word admin in it. If it has the word admin in it, we're going to go ahead and throw up a GUI and then stop the login. So we see here this is the same callback function that we're using earlier over in the authorization plugin, but we get to use it here in a whole separate class because we're just grabbing the reference from that mechanism. And we're going to call the K authorization result deny on that, and that will actually immediately stop the login, give you a nice shaky feature, and that's that. So we have all this imported, it builds. Last thing we need to do is actually hook it up. So we remember earlier in our authorization plugin mechanism invoke, we have a placeholder for the stop admin login. And under here, actually before we do that, we have to import the header file of stop admin login so we can access that class. So if we come back down to our placeholder, we can now call the stop admin class, and it's just a super simple public method, so we can say run mechanism, and we pass in the mechanism that we set up earlier with mechanism create. So we say save, build.
Yeah. David?
Before you imported these classes, basically these classes are customizing the plugin for your particular use.
Yeah.
Before that, it could be a different.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, that's a good point, David. Really, this authorization plugin class right here is pretty modular. So you're able to take it and do your own things with it. So it's basically gives you all the core requirements for interacting with authorization plugins, but then you just have to basically create another mechanism like I did here and hook it up.
Build in your own logic.
Yeah,
build in whatever you want it to do.
Hook it up, and you can make decisions based on anything, directory services. You can get really deep into it. So one thing I forgot to do is our mechanism record has that fstop admin login field that we set up earlier. So we're going to actually nest this inside of that to make sure that the mechanism that's being called is fstop login, stop admin login. And this mechanism will only run when the actual mechanism in the database is running. So it's a way of kind of allowing for multiple mechanisms with the same mechanism invoke method. So we're going to save that and build that and make sure that works. Sweet. We're looking good. So last piece we have to do is anything 10.9 and above has to be code signed. Kernel extensions or authorization plugins, or the login window won't accept it. So we're going to come in here, and I'm going to be using a 10.9 VM because the graphics are a little smoother on that. So I'm going to set that to 10.9. I'm also going to set the SDK to 10.9. And I'm going to come down here and code sign with a developer application. So now if I save it and build it, we should have a nice shiny bundle that we can hand over to Jeremy. He can put it on a system and see if it works. Just going to make sure it's code signed real quick. Looks good.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much, Tom. So thanks, Tom. Give him a round of applause, especially after the nice technical issues. So we're going to show you at this point how to install it. So for any of you who were just like, whoosh, maybe this will bring it back down a little bit, this is the kind of, again, sysadmin part of actually implementing it. However, Ed made me feel a little guilty this morning in the Google session, and I let Tom do all the coding as a sysadmin. So if you're a sysadmin, look through the code, you know. But no, it is actually, if you take the time to really kind of look through it a little bit, I don't have any Objective-C background, and we've gone over this quite a few times, but Tom has really developed a cool class that you can really do anything with. So if I would definitely recommend taking a few minutes looking into it, trying to understand what it's doing, because there's just cool stuff that you can do with plugins. So let me spin up my client machine here that we're going to use. I'm going to go ahead and log in to our admin. It's a little dark, sorry about that. So at this point again, Tom, my developer, has given me the .bundle. I need to put it on a system and actually make it work. So here that is. .bundle's here, great. If you don't recall, let me get out of that. We need to put it into /library /security agent plugins. Sorry. Everybody see that? Open library security agent plugins. Great. Drag it in. Need to be an admin here. So also, I did mention the admin prompt, how we're not touching those. This is what I was referring to. You can inject a plugin here at this point. Apple uses the fun example of if you have a fax machine and you want to put a pin on it. All right, we've got our .bundle. Awesome. Piece 1. Piece 2 is the database entry. So we're going to use the same command that I showed you earlier. It's going to be security authorization, if I can spell, db read system.login.console. And we're going to use standard out, and we're just going to put it on the desktop in a little plist. And we see success. Great. It wrote it out. Use Vim. OK. So this is what we saw earlier. This nice output of all the plugins that Apple's running. We're going to inject ours now and have it run. We're specifically going to put ours after the authenticate. So this plugin and mechanism that Apple has, built in is the plugin authenticates the mechanism. This mechanism is the one that first checks that it's a good password. So when the user enters their password, if it's the wrong password, this is the one that gives you that nice little shaky that Tom talked about. We want to make sure that they are in fact a valid user before we make the decision of whether to allow them in or not. So we're going to let Apple decide if they are at least the right person to be logging in. So we're going to put ours right after that. And again, we need to get the naming right. Verify auth plugin, our mechanism. Tom, again, if you didn't develop this, your developer will have to provide you the mechanism name or you'll never know what to call. So stop admin login. Tom shot me a nice email. Ours is not going to be privileged. We want to show the GUI, so we're going to leave that out. We're going to write that to the plist, and then we're going to use the same security command again, but we're going to change this from standard out to standard in and make it a write command. Whoops. We should be prompted for our admin credentials. Great. And we'll see success. And then if we were to, just wanted to show, if we were to now go back and read this, we'll see our plugin has now been inserted. So this is the straight output of what the authorization database has. So now is the big moment of the test. I know, after what we had earlier, I'm not so sure I want to test. All right, we log out. AV man, we're going to have sound in a second. Is my computer on? I'm sorry, I called you. That's Rick, everyone. I'm sorry, Rick. How rude of me. All right, perfect. So we have our admin user. Again, our plugin was simple, but it's going to check, and it's going to check to see if the short name of our user has the word admin in it. Let's give it a shot. So we have this fun GUI, and it pops up, and it says, hey, we detected an admin account. You're not allowed in. I know everybody loved it. Let's do it. We can prove success. Let's go. Thank you. So we can go to our standard user named Tom and Jerry. Please don't call me Jerry. And that one is allowed to go right in. Another important note, just to prove that we're doing very simply and just checking the admin name, we're not checking memberships. So I can go and I can make this user an admin, and it will let me in, and I can prove that. But you could check the admin membership. So you could, in your plugin, run a quick check on the user that's trying to log in and just say, are they an admin? Who cares if they have admin in the name? Maybe you have a user whose last name is Radman. I don't know. Yeah. Radman. Yeah. I'm going to show you that in just a second. But so if I want to make this user an admin, hey, we get this nice prompt. And our admin user wasn't allowed to log in at the login screen, but again, they are here, right? So we have our admin. Because we haven't touched that in the database, we were able to log in just fine. We can make this guy an admin. We all know you don't have to reboot to get that to work. Silly Apple. So at this point, he is an admin on the system. If I were to log in again, it goes just fine. Fast user switching uses the same authorization entry, database entry, so it will work. It's a little wonky. If we go into the password, or the admin, sorry, you guys know the password now, dang it! The admin account, it will run, but you can't break it. Doesn't matter how badly you try. You can enter as many times as you want. And again, just to prove that Apple is the one checking the passwords, if I just enter garble, they just say no. We never even get to our mechanism before they kill it. So, just a brief overview. Tom forgot all about this stuff, that's fine. So just to give a little wrap up, we've gone ahead and we've looked at what authorization plugins do, how they can be useful in your environment. We went ahead and we built one, we installed it. You saw how easy it was to put it on a system. Obviously, any management tool you use could very easily do this. It's just a few commands and putting a file in place. So that's it. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Have you built one similar to automatically promote a user if in, like, say, a verified list to admin?
We haven't done that. No, we haven't really found a need for that. We have 2 accounts at our place of work, so you actually have a separate account for being an admin. So we haven't really needed to. So just to follow up, I don't remember who it was who asked about the logout. I did look that up, and no, you can't use this for logout. Apple says logout hooks are still the way to go.
So, different.
Yeah.
Fast user switching. I'm thinking, if this would be useful for this, not one issue we have with lab environments, people, log in, launch Word, print a document, run off and leave it, screen lock, system screensaver comes on.
Uh-huh.
Now, nobody else walks up to the system to get into the system. And we've done some ugly things to try and force logouts and we wind up fighting Microsoft and various other things.
Sure.
What I can do is have some mechanism. I don't necessarily let the user back into that user session. I won't let anybody walk up to the system and click a button and just reboot the system.
Okay, so just to reiterate, the question is, if we have a user who walks away from a shared machine and it goes to a screensaver lock, right, and now they're logged into their user, how can we kind of get around that, either to log back in or to allow somebody else to reboot the machine? One answer is you are able to, there's another entry in the authorization database that's not related to plugins that allows any user, any admin user on the system to unlock the screen. Okay.
But the problem is obviously people, students walking up are not going to be admins. And the other issue,
I see what you're saying.
We've tried things that auto log out of the system after a timer, but then you run into, Word refuses to quit because it thinks I have an unsaved document.
Right.
I printed it and so it's like,
Do you know of any entry?
I think we would have to put it on a whiteboard and really take a look at that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you probably
That's a tough problem.
could do that with an authorization plugin, but it just might not be that pretty. I don't know. Alistair's holding up a computer. No one can see that, Alistair.
Yeah, essentially Craig auto logout in kill -9 logging window.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Do not passcode, do not collect $100. Also reboot the machine because
Yeah.
for great success.
So he was just saying, so yeah, you can kill the login window, which will reboot the machine, and obviously it's doing it forcefully using the kill command, you said?
It's doing those 2 consecutively because he's like,
Yeah.
he doesn't even want to get press catch, he wants another.
Oh, what he wrote is doing it consecutively. I see.
He added back in the option of just logging out, but he decided to start with that it could just get into it.
Gotcha.
So you can look at his mechanism.
yeah, I have it right now, basically just
Similar to
force
that.
kills everything, but for some reason, Word, I don't know, Microsoft,
Yeah.
when I disable the crash reporting, the thing still, I didn't have a set UID script that reboots the system, and somehow they're able to beat that.
Anybody else, any questions about plugins, about use cases for them, how to build one? Yep.
That's a good question. So
Repeat it.
the question was, can you access user environmental variables? It gets really tricky when you're in this weird state of the login window. So you're talking about specifically user environmental variables the system gives you, and like if they put it in their profiles, things like that. Yeah, actually, part of the context value is a failed login type, I believe. I'll have to look that up, but I believe that login count is on there. So you can access that already just within the Authorization Engine, one of the built-in features there.
Yeah, Johan?
Are you able to get a key modifier, like if we log in with Shift or any other key, are you able to get this info and change the way it works?
So that would be through the NS notification, the same way that you already look for keys in like a Cocoa app. I'm not sure if it passes through to that UI view that we're running, because we're running like we're not running a full NS app at that point. You can go ahead and call an NS app and then have it look for things at that area, but that view that I showed is a nib file being initialized, and it's not a full NS app running on the system. It's kind of like this hybrid that can be thrown at the login window.
Just thinking about the Shift or things like that, just like when you go to the safe mode.
Yeah. I'm not sure about that one. We would have to look. You can access Coca, the full foundation framework, from running, Objective-C version of these plugins. So I think you should be able to get at if the shift key is down or not, and then do something if it is. Yeah.
I think there's another question up front. Yeah. So he asked if you can write a bundle in Swift.
That's a good question. Yes. There's no reason why you can't. I haven't done it yet because I don't know Swift well enough. There's no reason you couldn't write it in Python either. You just have to have that main entry point to be an external facing C function, and then basically have it wrap up any other type of language that you're using, just like I did with Objective-C. Just that's the only really real requirement, is the Authorization Engine wants to call authorization plugin create as an external C function. So you just got to expose that, and then everything else under the hood could be whatever you want.
Anybody else? We got about 7 minutes. So if nobody else has any questions, feel free to come up. Any last? Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.